Hey, so something wild happened 2 weeks ago. I realized, thanks to my good friend Paulo Gia, that William Lane Craig responded to me in one of his podcasts. And William Lane Craig, you might know, is a sort of big deal in evangelical circles. For example, you might have seen this.
Unfortunately, children die all the time in infancy. And so if God wants to end the life of these Canaanite children early, prematurely, that's his prerogative.
Or this.
If evolution did occur on this planet, it was literally a miracle and therefore evidence for the existence of God. So I don't think this is an argument for atheism, quite the contrary. It really provides good grounds for thinking that God superintended the process of biological development.
Or who can forget my favorite, William Lane Craig debating Bart Ehrman.
And I hope to show tonight that the resurrection of Jesus is the best explanation of certain well-established facts about Jesus. Sadly, Dr. Ehrman came to radically different conclusions as a result of his studies.
Fun fact, when I first watched this debate, I was rooting for William Lane Craig because I was very clearly on his team. But something wild happened because William Lane Craig responded to me, little old me, put me in the same camp as Bart Ehrman and color me tickled pink. I am even wearing pink. It's wild to have one of my former evangelical heroes respond to me, and also sort of surreal that particular hero didn't actually like very much of what I had to say, although it's kind of understandable. But nevertheless, that is going on my YouTube bingo card. I'm going to take this video to respond to one thing that he said and one thing only. I will do other responses in other videos, and I actually did a full response with Paulo Gia, so you can watch for that. I will link to it below. But let me talk about one thing William Lane Craig said, because it was like the bee in my bonnet and it was right where he started. William Lane Craig started by saying, "I'm not a Christian." And, you know, I've talked a lot about my faith and my relationship to Christianity on this channel. And, you know, it's not perfect. It's kind of messy. I'm still learning how to talk about it. I don't always like talking about it, but I just keep kind of, you know, like messing through it because I think it does help people. So let me listen to this really quick and react to this, and then let's talk for a minute about whether or not I get to call myself a Christian. If this is your first time on the channel, my name is Chris, but let William Lane Craig's podcast tell you about my credentials. So here we go.
Bill, we've encountered a YouTuber who has a beef with Christian apologetics.
Yes, I do.
Chris Cornthwaite has his PhD in philosophy from the University of Toronto.
Actually, PhD in religious studies, but otherwise, he's off to a good start.
Master of Arts, the University of Western Ontario. Master of Divinity with distinction from the University of Western Ontario. And a lot more credentials. He was once in ministry and was once a teaching assistant at the University of Toronto.
That doesn't feel like that big of a deal, but I was a TA on some courses.
No longer in ministry, nor in academia. He has rejected the small-town fundamentalism of his youth, including young earth creationism, things like that. Yet he says he still identifies as a Christian, in his words. You know, we could get into identity politics, but we'll save a lot of that for another time. It's a really big deal these days, what you identify, how you identify. And I'm curious how this might relate to your work on saving faith in your systematic philosophical theology.
Yep, that's me. That's a quick little introduction to who I am. So if you haven't already done so, don't forget to subscribe, all of those things. And I have now been responded to by William Lane Craig. That baby's going on my resume. So let's let Dr. William Lane Craig tell me why I'm not a Christian.
Is it enough to merely identify as a Christian?
I think there are two components of saving faith, what I call propositional faith and personal faith. Propositional faith involves belief in certain truth claims. For example, Paul in Romans 10 says, if you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. So there are certain propositional facts that should be believed as part of being a Christian.
Now, you know, the wild thing is, just to interrupt Bill for just a second, I did all that. Like used to know that verse, Romans 10:9-10. If you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God is risen from the dead, you shall be saved. So I don't know. And I actually went to a church that was like a once saved, always saved church. And I really, really meant my salvation prayers. So, and all the years I spent believing like a fundamentalist. So I guess it's not enough. Anyway, let's keep going.
But then in addition to that, it's not just a matter of believing certain truths. James says, do you believe that God is one? Well and good. The demons also believe and shudder. So what the demons lack is not propositional faith. What they lack is that personal trust in God, personal trust in Christ.
Yes. Let's talk about this for a minute. Okay. The funny thing is that particular verse in James, and James as a whole, is actually a response to Paul. And James there is actually saying that what Paul teaches, that faith alone is enough, is nonsense. And the author of James actually uses that exact example, not to say that people who say that they believe and don't actually believe are not Christians or whatever. He actually uses that example to say that the Pauline understanding that faith without works is enough for salvation is not the case. And I know that a lot of modern fundamentalists bend themselves into pretzels to try to work out how both James and Romans can be in perfect alignment, how they somehow both use the example of Abraham's faith to come to completely different understandings of what faith actually is. Here's a newsflash for you. You can't actually reconcile the two. These are two different camps within early Christianity that are trying to reconcile what that faith actually looks like and whether or not that faith needs to have some sort of works attached to it. So already quoting the Bible at me the way that any fundamentalist could have done in the very small town uneducated community that I came from is not a very good start. Dr. William Lane Craig. The other thing that strikes me about this is this whole idea of personal saving faith. It ties in with a personal relationship with Jesus. This is like, the more I think about this as I left evangelicalism, it's evangelical coded nonsense. Like, it's a way of expressing yourself in a community, and it somehow like ties into emotionalism. Like, what is a relationship with Jesus? Like, it's so ineffable, it's so indefinable, yet somehow a lot of evangelicals think they can use this to dismiss other people as Christians, to say other people aren't Christians because you don't have this thing that I think you need to have, which is a relationship with Jesus. Like, how can you even test that? And to make matters worse, I don't even think a relationship with Jesus is a real thing. I know it's such a terrible thing for a Christian to say. I critiqued the idea in this video that I called "You Don't love Jesus, you love the idea of Jesus." And basically the argument is we don't have any access to the historical Jesus other than through the church. But this idea that modern evangelical fundamentalists have created, that they somehow rename the things they think as God's voice, and that they have this emotional response, and like by manufacturing emotionalism and self-talk and like this weird psychological dialogue that they think is happening with the divine, like none of that is Jesus. So to say you have to have that stuff to be a Christian, like many of us who have experienced that as a real thing, okay? There are many of us former Christians, former fundamentalists, former evangelicals. I'm still a Christian, but I've experienced this as well. Knowing that feeling that you are talking to the divine and the divine is talking back to you, in some cases directly with some people who are really out there, in some cases more subtly, like God is sending you clues about your life and stuff like this. Those are coded ways of talking. Those are ways that the evangelical religion has constructed to pretend you're talking to God. And it is a sociological phenomenon that came out of the hippie movement, as the sociologist T.H. Lerman has argued. It is just frankly ridiculous. And I defy you to tell me I'm not a Christian because I don't have an inner dialogue with God or some kind of real relationship that you can't even define. It's so undefinable. So no.
It's important to have both of these, both the personal commitment of love and trust to Christ, but then also certain propositional beliefs.
So let's cover again why I still call myself a Christian yet one more time, because people still don't seem to get it. I studied religion. I came out of evangelical fundamentalism. I spent a little bit of time as an atheist, but it was my study of religion that helped me understand that Christianity is my situation. Christianity is part of my identity. I find it very difficult to get rid of. And it's funny, if I was raised in another culture, if I was raised in a Muslim culture, I would be a Muslim because I was raised in that. And I am a Christian oh, this is going to make people mad. I'm a Christian because I was born into, let's say, born a Christian or born into a Christian world and raised in that world. Because for me, Christianity is not a set of belief propositions. I'm really sorry, William Lane Craig. You can decide all you want that I'm not a Christian. But the bottom line is I didn't even get to decide if I could be a Christian. Yes, I did. Of course, I prayed a prayer when I was 7. I was pretty sure I was making a really informed choice to choose Christianity, even though Christianity was the religion I was raised in. It was the only world that I was ever exposed to. The idea that I was a sinner who needed salvation was the only idea I've ever heard. Nobody ever lined up and was like, okay, here's all the world religions. Which one do you choose? And I was like, Christianity makes sense to me. I am a Christian because I was socialized to understand my relationship to the divine. And yes, I do keep a very open mind as to what the divine could be. But apart from that, I get it, I guess. But I just don't understand how somebody as bright as William Lane Craig just essentially makes the same dumb arguments I've heard in fundamentalism my entire life. How many people lived and died in the shadow of Christianity, being Christians, baptized Christian? Think about like all of the history of Christendom. How many people lived and died with having different ideas of Christianity, different beliefs, different understandings of who Jesus is? I was just reading the other day about one of the heretics named Arius, who famously believed that Jesus was created, that he was like a firstborn of the creation. And then it was partly the conflict with Arius that started the whole Council of Nicaea, and that's what that conflict led to us believing that Jesus was eternal and not created by God and not subordinated to God is probably the better actually way to say it, but that Jesus was eternal. And Arius, by all accounts, was a really beautiful soul, despite the fact that later church fathers and writers tried to demonize him. Coming back to James, we use the example of James in the introduction. If James believes that faith and works is what gets you to heaven or gets you saved, is that enough, William Lane Craig? But the wild thing is, for so many of us who are going through this deconstruction, is we start to look at these propositional beliefs and realize that they are carefully constructed beliefs that have emerged over the course of Christian history. But for the vast majority of Christians, I would argue their faith is sociological. Their faith is not actually something that came to them looking at a system of propositional beliefs and believing it. Their faith is something that they were taught made sense. They were given a world in which propositional beliefs made sense. They were socialized to speak a language of thinking through these propositional beliefs. The problem is that there are thousands of us kids who are raised in evangelicalism who were told from a young age, you don't get to belong to this faith until you pray a prayer. Told from a young age, you are a wicked, evil sinner until you pray a prayer and invite Jesus into your heart. And for whatever obvious reason, a lot of people do that. 4-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds, even 20-year-olds, pray a prayer, invite Jesus into their heart. I did when I was 7. And I think if I tell my story in a fundamentalist evangelical context, I would start with that story and say, like, that's when I got saved. And that was a real thing. That moment was a real prayer. It felt as real as anything else that I've ever gone through in my faith, even though I was just a kid. It felt really real. But the problem is that particular conversion experience, as real as it felt at the time, was incredibly artificial in another way, because it was the only choice I had. It was the only world I knew. I was not raised in another religion. I was raised in Christianity. Like, oh my God, William Lane Craig, you have done so much education on this. You're such a smart guy. Why are we still spouting off this simplistic nonsense and this ridiculous gatekeeping, by the way, like this evangelical fundamentalist gatekeeping of getting to say who's in and who's out? Aren't we all tired of that? Like, aren't we all tired of a world where somebody says, I'm a Christian, and you say, not really, you might not be, you might have believed the wrong way, you might have said the wrong prayer? Because if you were anything like me, raised in fundamentalist evangelicalism, I spent a lifetime hearing that. I had a lifetime of preachers standing up and saying, just because you sit in the garage doesn't make you a Cadillac. Just because you go to McDonald's doesn't mean you're a cheeseburger. And these were the ways of creating anxiety, belonging anxiety in Christian kids who prayed the real prayer, believed the real things because we believed the real things, and yet were constantly hounded by anxiety, even while still in the church. And this is while I was still in the church, hounded by anxiety over whether you did it right, over whether you prayed the right prayer. over whether you believe the right set of things. So here I am now with a PhD in Christian origins, and here I have one of the top evangelical smart people responding to me, and the first thing that person can think of to say is he's probably not really a Christian. And yes, I use the word identified as a Christian. I say that I identify as a Christian. And maybe that's a nod to identity politics, I guess. So if that's what you can just like kind of like laugh it off as if it's just like the wokeness of like our current generation. I don't think I identify as a Christian because it's identity politics. I think the reason I say I identify as a Christian is because that is the only cultural language I have been given for the divine. That Christianity is like my language for how I relate to the divine, such as it is. And if you want to give me a set of doctrines that I have to ascribe to, if you want to list things that are clearly problematic, that have been worked out through thousands of years of church history, and say you have to believe these things to be a Christian, I absolutely reject that. I think that is absolutely beyond ridiculous, and I think a lot of smart people are seeing through that nonsense. That is a very good way to try to convert people to a tribalistic God. It is not really a good way to try to relate to the God of the universe who is bigger than my particular tribe and culture. Remember that God who is the unmoved mover, Kalam, cosmological argument? I think it might be in there somewhere. I identify as a Christian because Christianity is my language for the things that I don't know how to say. Christianity is the way I relate to the divine. If I were raised in a Muslim country and I were socialized into that reality, I would be identifying as a Muslim right now, because that would be the way that I relate to the divine. And when I talk to Muslim friends, they talk about their faith, I talk about my faith. We can both kind of understand, like anybody who's had a friend of another religion who you have these conversations, you can kind of see that we're trying to do the same thing, but we speak different languages for it. And that could be true of any other religion. So I identify as a Christian because it is my language for unspeakable things. What am I left with? I am left with a kid, me, that's me. I'm 40 years old. I've been socialized into this religion. And I don't really know why people think the logical next step is A, I need to be an atheist, or B, I need to go like find another religion as if there's another one out there that's true that I should just go convert to it. No, Christianity is my religion. It has always been my religion. I didn't get a choice in that. I didn't get a choice in the fact that Christian hymns still move me while other things don't. I didn't get a choice in the fact that Christian spaces move me while other things don't. Christianity, for better or for worse, I'm stuck with it. Here I am. This is, the way that I choose to express my faith. Now, there will be some Christians who have moved on to different forms of things, different religions, different forms of spirituality, whatever. I choose to remain a Christian. And the thing that I absolutely reject, and I'm just so tired of, is the gatekeeping over the label of who gets to call themselves a Christian. I'm so tired of this. I don't know why we keep doing this. I'm pretty sure if you ask anybody, even in the evangelical world I grew up in, that's between me and God, not you. But for some reason, constantly, people obsess over who gets to call themselves a Christian. There, to my knowledge, is no universal test for who gets to use this word. And you know what's funny? The communities I grew up in were pretty obsessed with telling other Christians they weren't Christians. We looked at the Pentecostals and the Baptists and like Anglicans and the Catholics. None of them were Christians. None of them. Maybe the Pentecostals and the Baptists, but they were pretty lapsed. Like, we believe that most other groups who called themselves Christians were not Christians. And we even developed coded ways to talk about Christianity. We would call ourselves believers or call ourselves born again because the word Christian had been so diluted by the people we were pretty sure weren't Christians. For those of us who have deconstructed and who are trying to forge a way forward in this faith that is still a part of us, whether we like it or not, and we spend a lot of time in it, and it is, until the day we die, going to be a part of who we are, whether we like it or not. And there is to my knowledge, thankfully, I don't live in a world where I can be tried in an inquisition for having the wrong beliefs, because that has also been, throughout history, a great way to shut up the people who feel differently from, mainstream orthodoxy. We don't live in that world.
I did notice in that clip that he said he left Christianity for a long time, but apparently now I think he's back with a more intellectually informed faith, a deeper, more open-minded faith, which I think is just great.
Wait, I thought you started by saying I'm not a Christian. So maybe I am a Christian. I have a deeper, more informed, more intellectually honest faith. That's great.
I don't sense in him any different beliefs than those that I have, since I'm also not a young earth creationist or a King James Version only person. So
Yeah, I wish those were the only things we had differences on, but I think those are the minor things.
I think what he's plumping for in this video is really what you and I already accept, namely an intelligent, intellectually engaged Christianity. And what he's inveighing against is a very narrow, popularistic form of Christianity. He had indeed an extremely brittle, fragile faith that was easily destroyed even by the work of textual critics to establish the accuracy of the original text of the New Testament.
Now, I'm going to make another video at some point and talk specifically about William Lane Craig's claims about the Bible and the veracity of it and the manuscript evidence and, all of these like evangelical gems. The point that I wanted to make here is this: the gatekeeping, the gaslighting. Like, this is just the world you've come from. And I remember making this response to the Rhett McLaughlin, Alex O'Connor video, and it's exactly the same thing that I saw so many people trying to do with Rhett McLaughlin when he tells his story. Somebody tells their story, and your response is, here's what I think your faith actually was, whether it was good or bad. I'm going to make decisions about whether you're actually a Christian or not, or whether you used to actually be a Christian or not. I'm going to make decisions about whether you're still a Christian or not. And that is somehow an appropriate response. Guess what? It's nobody's damn business if I call myself a Christian. It is not William Lane Craig's damn business if I call myself a Christian. You can drum up your audience all you want and speak to the people in the pews and tell them to beware of those people out there, the wolves in sheep's clothing. I've been called that a few times, who call themselves Christians. The bottom line, there are thousands of us. Go look on the internet. There are videos of people deconstructing. We all are speaking the same language because we are saying we reject the rigid formulation of Christianity that people like William Lane Craig gave to us. And I know he can dress up his ideas in a lot of fancy jargon. He can, quote Klaus Westermann and use the German accent and sound really smart and really intelligent. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to the same thing. You're not a Christian. You never were a Christian because you didn't believe the right things. And the Bible is the inerrant word of God. And if you didn't believe that, then you just weren't looking closely enough. It's always the same thing. Every single progressive Christian who has ever tried to chart a different course forward with this faith has always had this. This is always the response by the people who want to gatekeep, or the people who want to tell you what you are feeling, the people who want to tell you who you are, what you were, the people who want to decide ultimately whether your salvation experience or your particular belief set or whatever fits within the box that you get to call yourself a Christian. Now, I think the only thing I can say about this is freedom comes from studying the history of Christianity and realizing that there have always been people like me who have deep issues with the Christian faith, but choose to be in it anyways, who have deep ambivalence or even serious problems with some specific doctrines, but choose to stay a part of this and choose to work it through. There are a lot of Christians like me who have to say the creed with their fingers crossed, or who have serious doubts about the resurrection, which I do, by the way. And I don't even think Paul believed in a bodily resurrection, but that's a story for another day. We exist. We are here. And in fact, if the internet is any indication, we are a generation of kids who were raised in this BS that William Lane Craig is spouting, and we still deconstructed, not because our faith was brittle, not because it wasn't real, but because the evangelical box was BS to begin with. It's gatekeeping, it's gaslighting, And aren't we just tired of this? Like, aren't we just tired of this being the faith that like these evangelical leaders, or, you know, you probably see this on a different level if you're your own pastor, your own church, whatever, wherever you came from. Aren't you just tired of this world where everybody thinks they get to determine if the faith of others is real, or this world where everybody has to see your deconstruction as a personal slight that they have to fight back against? Like, this is just, for most of us, deconstructing, it's just our life. We're just trying to figure it out. It's not perfect. It's not neat. But the fact that we're honest about who we are and what we believe, and the fact that we're not turning to Christian apologetics to try to keep the same beliefs we had when we were kids because those answers have come up empty, I think it's pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool that we're trying to, for those of us trying to stay in this faith, we're re-navigating what it means to be here. And there's a long tradition in church history of people who have done that. Some of them have been erased by the church. Some of them have been forgotten. Some of them have been written out of history. Some of them have been tried as heretics. But we are still here. We're still here at the end of the line because every day there's somebody who wakes up and realizes the stuff that I believed isn't as clear-cut as I thought. It doesn't give me enough to see the world. And the apologetics that I tried to use to protect it are, quite frankly, weak, juvenile attempts to keep my faith without change, to keep myself in the same little box that I've had since my youth. I think there are a lot of us who want something more. And if this faith is going to survive, if this faith is going to move forward, and if those of us raised in it are going to stay connected to it in some way, I think we have to have these conversations, not because we fit, you know, people still in the faith, people who are still clinging to it, and good for you. I'm not trying to deconvert anybody, but people who are still in the faith don't understand what it feels like to be on the other side and trying to figure it all out. And that's where we are. We all, like, there are thousands of us, there are tens of thousands, judging from the amount of plays on deconstructionist videos and the amount of influencers talking about deconstructionism. This is a mass social movement from former evangelicals that, quite frankly, I think that has the church scared shitless. And I see all these videos like, how can your church protect itself against deconstruction? Guess what? You can't. You can't protect yourself against deconstruction, because if you have constructed a faith that falls apart when challenged, even with all the actions by apologists like William Lane Craig, who try to make kids think that it's safe to keep believing, and you see him go on, you know, other shows like Alex O'Connor and defend slavery, or like all, anyway, there's a sidebar. I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole. If we want Christianity to move forward, we have to have these conversations. So how about, instead of living our lives like this, that like you get to police who's in and who's out, and that you know, set up this set of doctrines people have to believe, like, how about we experience a new way to relate to Christianity? And if you are going through a period of deconstruction and you are having people say, as you express whatever those newfound beliefs are, and people are saying, it's not good enough, you're not a Christian, you never were a Christian, what can we do? We're here, we're exploring this together, we are naming the reality. And I think for most of us raised in a Christian context, we're just doing exactly what we were taught to do, which is to tell the truth. I hope that was interesting. I'll do some more reactions to more of William Lane Craig's comments to me at some point. But for now, that's enough for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch. I'll see you next time.